In Edwin O'Connor's mesmerizing novel, The Last Hurrah, written 70 years ago, the 72-year-old, two-time governor and current Boston mayor Frank Skeffington announced that he will run for re-election. Shocking his enemies and delighting his beneficiaries, he declares, quote, "My decision reflects my submission to the will of the populace and is against my every personal desire. I cannot abandon this fine city to the care of such fumbling hands," close quote. Lunching with his nephew Adam just prior to his announcement, he revealed his reason more than any other that he had decided to stay in public life, quote, "because I want to," close quote. Professor Charles Duffy on Edwin O'Connor's The Last Hurrah, an entrancing novel of ambition, charisma, and Irish machine politics now. My name is Tod Worner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Professor Charles Duffy is a native New Englander, born in Boston, pursued his bachelor's and master's at Boston College and his PhD in English at Tufts University. He spent 45 years as a professor of English with a special emphasis on British and Irish literature at Providence College in Rhode Island, and is author of A Family of His Own, A Life of Edwin O'Connor. He is a former department chair and director of the humanities program at Providence College. Retired now, he is approaching his 60th anniversary and is the proud parent of 2 children and grandparent of 3 grandchildren. Charlie Duffy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Tod.
Segment 1, The Man in the Race. In the early pages of Edwin O'Connor's novel, The Last Hurrah, Mayor Frank Skeffington tells his nephew, Adam, quote, "You'd be surprised how politics seems to fascinate people. People who wouldn't for 5 minutes actually get into the act themselves. They like it as spectators. It's the greatest spectator sport in the country. People begin as strangers, and in a little while, they know the names and numbers of all the players. A little while more, and they're telling the coaches how to run things. They wouldn't play the game for $10,000, but it's great fun to sit in the stands and look on. I must say I can understand how they feel. It is exciting to watch," close quote. So, Charlie, let's begin with the obvious question. Who exactly is Frank Skeffington? And is it true that he's modeled after Boston Mayor James Michael Curley?
Yeah. Well, that last question was asked again and again and again when the book came out, and it made a big splash, and people, especially in the Northeast, fastened on the book and fastened on the picture of Skeffington, and that was the question they asked: is Skeffington Curley? And the answer is not particularly simple. It's a yes and a no. Yes, he is modeled on Curley, because without a James Michael Curley, there would never have been a Skeffington. So that should clear the air right there. He has a long political career, as Skeffington does, just like Curley. His special efforts were for the benefit of the Irish primarily. He had the personal touch always in almost everything he did, and he had very savvy instincts. So Skeffington and Curley match up really, really perfectly here, I think. But when you look at his name, it's not an Irish name. It's not an Irish name. And Curley, O'Connor often did this in writing about the Irish. He often gave them Anglo names, not Irish names. You see this again and again. Whereas Skeffington's opponent, McCluskey, gets an Irish name, all too Irish. So I think the clue to this, the way to solve this puzzle, is that O'Connor, in portraying Frank Skeffington, of the mayor of an anonymous city that is obviously Boston, he's portraying a more idealized version of Curley, the way Curley, the way he would have liked Curley to have been, because Curley had a nasty side. He was racially prejudiced, somewhat anti-Semitic, and so on. He also wanted to be, Edward O'Connor wanted to be acceptable to the Boston Brahmins that he rubbed shoulders with, especially his publisher, but others. Curley, the actual James Michael Curley, was still alive, of course, when the book was written and was being published, and he was notorious for threatening lawsuits, and he actually threatened one. Yes, he actually threatened one for both the novel and the movie version 2 years later, but he never followed suit. I think wiser minds were able to get to him and restrain him. He was also, Skeffington was also an idealized version of O'Connor's notion of the ideal fatherhood. Over and over again in his work, you see O'Connor portraying fathers, both not so good and good.
Sure.
And Skeffington is definitely one of those. So he substitutes Adam, Curly's, I keep saying Curly, Skeffington's nephew. Adam is there as the kind of nephew / son, since Curly, Skeffington's son is something of a zero. Adam is like the adopted son, you might say, of. So, but the thing is, he is definitely modeled on Curly in many ways, but not the more important ways. I think that's how I'd put it.
Yeah, well said. So stepping away from the characters for just a moment and going into the scene, The Last Hurrah takes place in a bustling, multi-ethnic Massachusetts city. Again, like you said, it's an anonymous city, but it's for all intents and purposes, is Boston in the early 1950s. Tell us, what is the state of Northeastern American politics in the early 50s? And could you say a few words about the Irish and machine politics that offered a disenfranchised people avenues to power?
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember Curly. I saw him once, actually, in a St. Patrick's Day parade in South Boston. I was about 9 or 10 years old, I guess. And when he came along in the parade, so I think he was sitting in the back of a convertible. He was an old man, of course, at that time, but still in office. So he was campaigning, obviously. But when I looked at him, I realized in retrospect that I was looking at the past. He was clearly, although a much loved figure by Bostonians, especially the Irish Bostonians, you could tell that even a kid could tell that this was a man on his way out. The machines, the way the old machines worked, had a lot of undoubted corruption in them. Although it's important to notice that Edwin O'Connor Skeffington did not enrich himself through the machine politics. He was a conduit of money for other people on a very personal basis. The Kennedy era, of course, would come all too soon after this, from the late 50s on. Senator Kennedy, then President Kennedy. And all that changed quickly, overnight practically. That parochialism was on the way out, and a new era had begun after 1960, no question.
Yeah. So Skeffington, just again, more introduction. He's been twice. He's served as governor. He's currently serving as mayor of this city. The whole story opens up with him giving a press conference and effectively musing about whether he'd retire and read Shakespeare, when in fact he ultimately decides he's going to have one last go at to run as mayor. Needless to say, he is the star of this entire show of The Last Hurrah. It's unfolding the character of a master politician, an ethnic Irishman, a product of the machines, but also the product of impoverishments raised by a mother who was a servant, and so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the people that surrounded Skeffington. So I'm gonna name some of these characters, and I just want you, if you don't mind, just say a few words about each. We'll kind of do a little bit of not a lightning round, but just a little bit of a brief primer on the people that surround him. So let's start with Frank Skeffington's son, Frank Jr. You said something about him already, but Frank Jr.
Yeah, well, he's barely there, isn't he? He seems to be an extremely clueless, as we'd say today, clueless person. Yeah. He doesn't seem to even know what it is that his father does, except that he goes to City Hall. He's not very fleshed out at all in the novel, for the good reason, I guess, that he doesn't have much there. And he's obviously something of a playboy. The antithesis to being a responsible civic servant, to be sure.
Yeah.
Skeffington himself doesn't seem to be particularly upset about this. He just simply lets him go, I guess, even though his son lives in the house with him, but they barely meet each other. So, yeah, he's a bit of a puzzle. I'm not sure why exactly O'Connor puts him in the book, but there he is.
And then obviously filling this void. Now, just so we also can say that Skeffington is a widower. His wife has passed away some time ago and was a deeply devoted husband, and looked at her as his confidant throughout the his past and all of his experiences. Adam Caulfield and his wife Maeve kind of fill in where Frank Jr. kind of leaves off. Tell us a little bit about Adam and his wife, who serves as effectively the greatest of the minor characters, but he's kind of a main character, if you will, Adam Caulfield.
Yeah. Well, Adam is a device simply to have an observer.
Yeah.
It's somewhat awkwardly done, I think. I think O'Connor knew this too. But anyway, he sets it up so that Adam will be following him around whenever he wants to, apparently, or whenever he's invited to during the campaign. Adam has a wife named Maeve, and you can see the word "Eve" in there very clearly.
Good one.
Adam
and
Eve, his son and the son's wife are sort of innocent in this whole thing. Adam never really knew his uncle very well, and now he has this big chance to. And Maeve, whose father detests Frank Skeffington, is a little bit afraid of the guy, that he might be some kind of a monster. And when she gets to meet him more fully, she begins to realize that he's a very human person, a very nice man in many ways. So there we are, the prelapsarian Adam and Eve. Coming into the world of politics. But it's no great fall here for Adam and Eve. This Adam and Eve. They enjoy their brief day there with him. Edward O'Connor is not particularly given to exploring evil the way a Flannery O'Connor might have done.
Sure.
Or Robert Penn Warren might have done. He wanted to see always the best in people for the most part, and he gives the good people a lot of attention, and the villains not too much attention. But there we are. That's Adam's function, and I think Adam also discovers that Frank Skeffington becomes a kind of father figure for him too.
Yeah. So let's move to some of Frank's competition: Charlie Hennessy, Festus, Mother Garvey, and Kevin McCluskey. Tell us about Charlie Hennessy a little bit.
Charlie Hennessy is modeled on a real Bostonian figure named Clem Norton, who was a perennial candidate for mayor and other things as well. He was a complete nutcake. He owned a farm truck, and he was a one-man campaigner. He had no aides or followers. He just simply campaigned for himself. And he'd drive around the city with the sound truck, the old-fashioned sound truck that much disappeared from politics these days, and blaring out as loud as he could on the soundtrack how bad a person, how bad a mayor Frank Skeffington is. Although he does admit that he's an honest politician. He doesn't grab money for himself. So that was Clem Norton, a real character.
Okay. How about
he's one of those several people in the novel that are there for comic relief.
Yeah. He's almost manic. He's constantly brilliant, but obviously as a tangential and just a pressured speech and so on.
Yeah.
Festus Mother Garvey. How about that character?
Yeah. Well, again, he's another coattail guy. He hangs on to. I think he's simply there for comic relief. I can't see him doing anything very much. Mother Garvey. Yeah. To go back to Hennessy for a moment, he let's see. What do I remember about him? Oh, what happened with him? There's something in particular I wanted to say. Well, I forgot that. You have to cut
That's
that
it.
out.
We can edit that out. That's fine. That's
Okay.
How about
Hey,
Kevin McCluskey, who ends up
Yeah.
being the person that runs
Yeah.
against Skeffington, a young
Right.
man? Tell us about him.
He's barely there, isn't he? He's campaigning and he wins. But the two of them, Skeffington and McCluskey, never actually go at it in person that I can remember anyway in the novel. And you would think that in a political novel that there would be some scenes where they would be actually facing each other, but no. O'Connor hated conflict, which is strange for a writer. He was very distressed at any conflict within the family, his friends, his associates, and so there's a strange lack of strong conflicts in his fiction. There was a dramatization of The Last Hurrah in Boston about 20 years ago, and I was invited to go and talk in a group to the audience afterwards. And one of the persons in the audience said, "Why is there no conflict in this novel?" in this story? And I said, "Well, that's part of O'Connor's personality. He got very upset about conflicts."
Yeah.
So McCluskey actually doesn't really conflict very much with Frank Skeffington. As a person himself, he's maybe very loosely modeled on Curley's successor, Mayor John B. Hines, who turned out to be, not a spectacular person, not a funny person, not a personality, nothing like that. But he was a good, solid mayor who actually put Boston on a new direction. He had a larger vision than Skeffington ever had, and Boston began to do a great deal of urban renewal. Some of it good, some of it not so good, and Boston sprung up under his leadership in the 1960s and 70s.
And one of the things we discover about McCluskey as we're reading this is that he's a young guy. He's got a young family. He kind of hit the marks of service in the war and good with this and so on. But he's sort of he's a little bit kind of a fill in the blank guy that seems to be operated by the powers that be. And one of the scenes is where he's being filmed on television. He's using television in a way that's so different than Skeffington believes in kind of beating the streets and glad handing and shaking hands and so on and so forth, as opposed to the whole television scene. And there's a scene in there where it's like he's got the big gigantic portrait of Pius XII behind him, which was kind of foisted on him, and he's got a rented Irish setter sitting in the room and so on. And it's it seems to be very kind of canned, and yet there is something kind of eerily effective about it that's dismaying to Skeffington and his partners. Yeah.
His name alone, McCluskey, clunky. Yeah. It sounds like a satirical Irish name. Overly Irish. I guess O'Connor thought that when the Skeffingtons of this political world pass away, it's going to be much. It's not going to be so much fun anymore. Yeah. You won't have. You'll have these college trained sound boxes that don't really have a lot to say and a lot to offer. Life won't be so interesting anymore. But we don't really know much about McCluskey. We never really hear much from him in the novel. I guess that's deliberate. Yeah. Lastly,
Skeffington has enemies too, and we don't have to go through each one of them. But we have the newspaper publisher Amos Force. You have the Cardinal Martin Burke, and even Maeve's father Roger Segru. Kind of what do these people have this visceral kind of disdain for Skeffington? Yeah. What is it? What is it about Skeffington that just kind of raises their hackles?
Well, Amos Forth, for example, the newspaper owner or editor, I forget which, he is a force to be reckoned with because he has influence over people from his newspaper positions. He's an old Yankee Brahmin type, like a Norman Cass, the banker. And to them, the Irish are simply these people who have invaded the city 100 years ago, during the famine, overran it and took it over very quickly. And so they are the enemy to this group. They are very brilliantly done satires, but O'Connor is obviously really overdoing it too. At the same time, as satires often go. To go back to Amos Forth and so on, O'Connor is very good sometimes, like George Orwell, on describing food and dinners and the sense of smell and so on. And when someone goes to one of Amos Forth's horrible dinners, it is an atrocious.
Yeah, it's awful.
You get one dull boiled potato, he says, and so on. And he was extremely good at using food, and like George Orwell, to be able to capture people somehow. It's unusual. Segru is, of course, Adam's father-in-law, and so that makes some tension there. The cardinal is interesting. We don't see him very much, but he is concerned all too much with a Roman Catholic giving scandal, and that's how he sees. That's how he sees Skeffington. That he's giving the Irish a bad name, giving the church a bad name, and so on and so forth. And that excessive giving of the scandal stuff would really be echo down the decades until the clergy scandal. When at all costs you were supposed to not give scandal. And boy, did that ever backfire. So this crusty old cardinal, who is also a figure that's going to be passing from the scene, he's modeled on the old Cardinal O'Connell of crusty fame. His successor, Cardinal Cushing, Bishop Cushing and Cardinal Cushing, was a wonderful person with a great sense of humor and had the human touch. So he was very different, but he's not in the novel.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the right-hand men, the role of the right-hand men, the operators in the life of Frank Skeffington. These are bigger characters: John Gorman, Sam Weinberg. So how important are these men in the plotting, the calculating, and the winning on behalf of Skeffington? And I want to say, how much are they representative of the James Bakers, the James Carvilles, and the Carl Roves of today?
Yeah, I don't think they're, strangely enough, they're interesting characters. They hang around a lot, and there's a lot to say sometimes. But, they're not really that influential as advisors. They certainly don't control Skeffington.
Right.
Neither one. So they have their say. They speak to Adam a little bit, and so on. But Skeffington is his own man, and he thinks he can continue to do forever what he's always done. And of course, it doesn't work this time. But I think also O'Connor wanted to put in people like Weinberg, the Jewish guy, and I think there's an Italian guy there somewhere, or at least an Italian guy who reports to them. And so he wants to. He knows enough not to have a totally Irish outfit. So that's why he puts in some staffers. They've been with him a long time, and they're very loyal to him. And sometimes they have very wise things to say. They're little portraits that are interesting, but they're not really important that much as advisors to Skeffington.
Sure. So Frank Skeffington, we know, lacks connection with his son Frank Jr., but takes a shine to his nephew Adam. Why does Skeffington, I mean, you alluded to this earlier, but why does Skeffington extend himself to his nephew? What's the point of having Adam witness his last campaign?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's a bit of an awkward connection. Adam writes this silly comic strip that doesn't seem to ever figure too much into the story. I think O'Connor should have done more with that comic strip that Adam writes. But he never knew much about his uncle until this time. And so he does learn to appreciate, learns to appreciate the old Irish plight, that the Irish had to have some way of fighting back in the way against the people who always kind of put them down. And so he learns to appreciate Skeffington's help in this matter. But he's not a Jack Burden in All the King's Men. Jack Burden carries a great burden. He carries a heavy weight. He's, he really is the most important person in the novel, as he observes. I forget his name. Who's the Louisiana dictator there?
Oh gosh, it's not.
We're both forgetting it.
Yeah,
but somebody modeled on that big Louisiana political family. Way back in the 30s and 40s. So Jack Burden is a fully fleshed out character that has his own story, which interweaves with the politics in the novel. Adam is a way to witness the passing of old times, and that is a persistent O'Connor theme. He was a very nostalgic person. Some of his critics called him too nostalgic, that O'Connor could never really reconcile himself to the past, that the past is really past, and you just got to get on with things. So you see a lot of that, but I think the main thing about Adam to notice is that he learns to appreciate things about the Irish that he never knew.
Yeah.
And he gets to have a deeper understanding and sympathy for the difficulties of the Irish. But the Irish, the funny thing about the Irish at this time is that they were rapidly assimilating. I mean, Kennedy gets elected just 4 years after the novel comes out, so it was a rapid, almost overnight change of everything, and including politics.
When Adam gets kind of enticed into the offices of Skeffington to kind of maybe be a witness to this campaign and so on, he feels a little bit stung that, first of all, Adam's a little bit aloof because of his a little bit of distance from his uncle, a little skepticism of his wife, but then he feels a little bit stung that when it comes to the announcement and it's this big to-do, he's not reached out to by Skeffington, and he feels like he's not really being courted per se until he's surprised when the mayor invites him to an Irish wake of Naco Minihan, and Frank afterwards, so I think Adam's like, why you bring me here? You didn't bring me to the big announcement with the bands and all this kind of stuff, and you bring me to this guy who's died, and it's kind of this awkward wake, if you will. And Frank says afterwards, Naco Minihan was the name of the guy who died. Naco's wake is the kind of thing you might not come across in the ordinary run of events. Yet, in a way, I think it's far more valuable to you in understanding the whys and wherefores of the campaign and the city than attendance at any number of rallies would be. Skeffington also called a wake in his childhood the first political rally I've ever been to. I was just too young to know it. So, say a few words about what did Adam see at the wake?
Well, he saw an Irish wake, a big fun, as Joyce called it, a big fun for all. And in this fun for all, like Finnegan's wake, you have a lot of drinking and dancing and so on. This is not that kind of wake.
Yeah,
this is a political wake, and it's strange when people will sometimes tell me, "Oh, wasn't that a great Irish wake scene with all the drinking and stuff in the Last Hurrah?" I said, "You're disremembering. It was not that kind of wake. It was not a Finnegan's wake. This was a very serious wake. People make old friendship, reconnect with old friends and things like that. It was a social thing, a political thing. And as the Harvard professor John Kelleher said, it was the place where the Irish could, in the old days, gather politically and campaign and socialize. And there might have been a lot of drinking, of course, in some of these wakes, but that was not the wake O'Connor was determined to picture. He was a teetotaler himself. He never drank. I think the spectacle of Frank O'Malley may have been a factor here.
His professor at Notre Dame.
Yeah. his professor at Notre Dame, whom he greatly admired, was an alcoholic, and O'Connor was very saddened at this spectacle. So Adam had a chance here to see the path in the wake, the old folks, the old customs, but he and Skeffington don't realize yet that these things are passing away rapidly. And O'Connor is trying to, in a sense, capture the old wake, or something like the old wake, without the alcohol, without the dancing. But he saw it as a genuinely interesting social event. I just went to a wake from one of my cousins last week, and it was a little bit like an Irish wake. People laugh, they tell jokes, and all the rest. But it's a greatly scaled down sort of thing. It's not quite like the old ones.
Segment 2, the charisma, style, and tradition of Frank Skeffington. In enticing his nephew Adam to sit in on his last campaign for mayor, Frank Skeffington offers him 3 reasons. Quote, first of all, purely as entertainment, a big political campaign, if it's run right, is one of the greatest shows on earth. Secondly, it ought to be interesting to you to just watch the people in action. You don't have to be interested in politics to be interested in the way people tick. And third, the campaign might even have a certain historical interest for you. You'd be watching something that in a few years from now will be as dead as the dodo bird. That's the old-fashioned political campaign. I'm about the last of the old-style political leaders who's still alive and moving around, close quote. So in this segment, Charlie, with all your insights and wisdom on Edwin O'Connor and this book, I want to talk about the many facets of Frank Skeffington. So first, his love of the anecdote. Flannery O'Connor once said, "You tell a story because a statement would be inadequate." So Skeffington is a raconteur in the vein of an Abraham Lincoln or even a Lyndon Johnson, who tells stories that are witty and wise, entertaining and instructive. What is the role of storytelling in political campaigns?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And the more I think of it, the Irish are great storytellers. I mean, think of all the short stories, for example, that Irish writers have contributed to modern literature in the 19th and 20th centuries. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, and still rolling, by the way. They still fill the magazines and so on. For the Irish, narration, storytelling is how they explain things, not by political science or sociology or so on. That's not fun. So the Irish are always looking for a good excuse for fun. So narration, storytelling, by the turf fire, in the tavern or at home, is the way they communicate. And I think that's one of the great features of the Last Hurrah, is that Connor gives us a sense of that in the way they do talk. The talking is often exaggerated, like Jonathan Swift's satirical work. It's often exaggerated, often made up stuff, but there it is. And once you know how to play the game and realize that you have to adjust your aesthetic sensibilities when you hear these narrations, but that you begin to get intrigued by it.
Yeah, this was such a vibrancy. I mean, that's I couldn't wait to get to these pages with Skeffington kind of spinning a yarn or telling a story or one more anecdote. And I think we all know, if we're sitting in mass and we're listening to a homily and the pastor, is or the priest is giving a perspective and then says this one time, or I remember when, or let me tell you a story. You sit up a little taller, because we're storytelling and story hearing creation, if you will. Good. Yeah, exactly.
O'Connor, one of O'Connor's editors, I think it was Ted Weeks at the Atlantic Monthly, once said of Edwin O'Connor, he wrote with his ears. Even as a young boy, apparently, he would sit by the old folks as they would tell stories, especially about politics, about the people he would hear about on radio or in the newspaper. And he was fascinated by the way what they talked about and how they talked about it. So from a very early age, I think he was fascinated by this Irish way of storytelling, the endless stories, the stories that never seem to end, the anecdotes, the humor, the exaggeration. It was all the stuff that he would take into adulthood and depict and use. It's really the heart of the novel in many ways, isn't it?
It is. Charlie, Frank Skeffington was a patron who ran the Irish political machine in his city. So whether it's helping Mrs. Santagata by moving her son Joey from one high school class to another, or giving Timsy Coughlin $10 for his bladder medicine, or giving $1,000 to the widow of Naco Minihan, there's a bit of the Godfather in Frank Skeffington. Without the same darkness, it seems, and yet it doesn't seem entirely cynical or utilitarian. It seems he seems to like these people and wants to help them as well. So is Frank Skeffington an uncommon politician who also has a heart?
Yeah, I think from O'Connor's perspective as a Catholic, I think he sees Frank Skeffington as performing the corporal works of mercy in many ways. He, for example, take the issue of what do I want to say? School playgrounds.
Yeah,
finally got it. Playgrounds for children. That was one of his important issues. That some of these kids in some of these neighborhoods didn't have a playground to go to.
Yeah.
But the old timers, the Brahmin bankers, editorializers in the Brahmin newspapers and so on, wouldn't hear such a thing. And for him, that was like a minimum of social justice.
Yeah.
If the kids, they have a playground for heaven's sakes to go to. So so he saw himself, I think, as a Robin Hood of sorts. Yeah. Not a mafia type. Yeah. He was not into any kind of political violence, any kind of code of silence. No, that was not the way he operated. He operated rather openly, and did not gain money for himself. That was not his way at all. And it was always done with a personal touch, and it was the kind of thing, of course, that somebody says later in the novel, that the New Deal and all the post-Roosevelt politics didn't have any use for. And he's not an evil man by any means. However, since the issue of corruption does come up, you do get a little disturbed at the way he lightly treats things like Footsie McEntee. Remember him? He's the guy who, on election day, boasts of the fact that he could vote in 17 different precincts. That's why they call him Footsie. He would be footing it rapidly to get through his 17 ballots. Now, they can laugh at it and so on, and it does have a certain element of humor. Yeah. But it's a really very serious thing.
That is.
To go around. And of course, the democratic machines in many cities, need we say, Chicago, and so on, were apparently notorious for tolerating this sort of thing. And it's the kind of thing, of course, that Trump would pounce on in 2020. Kind of a Robin Hood figure. Always meaning well, always looking out for the widows and the orphans and so on, and the children. I don't think he should have given that guy the $10 though. To water his bladder.
And also when the city was in desperate need of loans and all the banks are holding out, Skeffington is the enforcer in that he checkmates the bank president by putting the bank's president's son in an embarrassing position. Where the son is gonna this person is gonna be made a fool of as the fire marshal when he's completely unequipped to do that, and the bank president has to give the loan so that
Yep.
the Skeffington backs off on the
Yes.
offer.
Yeah. So that is fun. Yeah. Yeah. He can strong arm people.
Yeah.
But not by, threats of violence or anything like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yes, Skeffington was also a traditionalist, as O'Connor
Yes.
writes in the Last Hurrah. Quote, virtually every sector of the city was covered, including parts that Adam knew fairly well. Even these, however, he saw now under a different aspect, as his uncle's rich stream of anecdote and information poured over buildings, statuary, landmarks, and memorials, which Adam may have noticed casually in passing, but which hitherto had held no meaning to him. Close quote. The thing about Skeffington is he's a guy that you could tell you 1,000 stories on every block about this and that, and it's just deep and rich and it's storied. It's deeply wedded with tradition. What does the love of city, along with its customs and cultures, mean to a citizen or a civic leader, especially as demonstrated by Skeffington?
Yeah, he's a traditionalist at heart, as you say. A person who enjoys and respects the past.
Mm-hmm.
He's not like any kind of trained social scientist who often sees the past as a series of mistakes.
Yeah.
And he's not like that at all. Today he would not be a woke person or a cancel culture advocate or anything like this. You work with the past as you work with the present.
Yeah.
And you don't discount it. When the Last Hurrah first came out in 1956, a social science professor, I think an urban planner, something like that, at a New York university, wrote a not so nice review of the novel because she didn't see enough urban planning in the novel, and this sort of thing. Some of which could be, of course, very destructive, as we now know.
Yeah.
But so as a traditionalist, he doesn't want to change things too much. There's no talk about slum removal or that kind of thing. Put in a playground, that's his. And so, in that respect, he's very much like Edwin O'Connor. There's Edwin O'Connor's thinking right there. He was very much a traditionalist in many, many things. For example, when Vatican II comes along, O'Connor was rather cool about it. He didn't like so many traditions, like the Latin Mass and so on, disappearing. And I think before he died, he always remained a Catholic, of course, but before he died, I think he was somewhat distressed at what he thought was the wrong turn the church made.
Frank Skeffington, Charlie, was also wise. He said, quote, the best advice I ever received as a young politician was go to all the dinners, but eat none of the food. That's the stuff that kills a man, close quote. And he also said, in politics, only a young man can afford to look tired. So time and time again, Skeffington offers insights that surprise in their wisdom, even 70 years later. I mean, there's things that Adam would ask him, and his answer surprised me in its insight. And this is an old book. A simple observation, a keen diagnosis, a pragmatic solution, a witty riposte. Skeffington is blessed with common sense and intuition, storied experience, and sharp analysis. What's your sense? What's the message Edwin O'Connor is giving us about the secret of a Skeffington arriving at this type of wisdom?
Yeah, well, he's not Plato's philosopher king. We should
true.
say that.
Yeah, for sure.
But he has his own folksy wisdom.
Yep.
Which is what people really respond to, I think. Given the American urban situation at the time, right after, during most of the 20th century until the 1960s, his way of going about things is just that. It's a way to get people on his side. He's very open to other people. He doesn't tell them what to do very much. He's not a crusader.
Yeah.
He's dealing with people's individual problems. But he has no comprehensive political plan for changing things. He's not like that. And in that way, he kind of endears himself to people. The Kennedys, of course, are going to change everything, and Lyndon and LBJ especially, with the Great Society. This is not Frank Skeffington's way, though. Is there something to it? Is it good politics? I don't know. It works maybe on smaller situations, but the more you go up the ladder, state, and then country and so on, it's not that useful, I guess.
Yeah. Finally, last point in this segment. Frank Skeffington could be soft. Adam's skeptical wife, Maeve, who lost her mother shortly after she was born, Skeffington warmly regaled her with kind memories of ancestors, including her mother, that she had never met. It was kind of a bouquet. And as O'Connor writes, quote, Skeffington continued to talk, leading gradually into other stories of other people of a bygone age. They were stories which Adam had not heard before, stories of a kind not altogether characteristic of his uncle. They were curiously lacking in the sardonic, irreverent current which flashed through the usual Skeffington narration. They were quiet stories, quietly told, warm and affectionate memoirs, ideally recounted in the richly and softly rolling tones. As they rolled on, Adam realized that they were special stories meant for a special audience. He looked at his wife and saw their success. Maeve was captivated by the elderly raconteur, close quote. Just Charlie, you've alluded to it already, but tell us a little bit about the warm side, the soft side of Frank Skeffington.
Yeah, it's somewhat the way people saw Edwin O'Connor. He was a great friend of people. His friendship was deeply important to him. He, for example, if anybody and his associates didn't respond to him, he got very hurt, I think, sometimes. Skeffington is not a saint by any means, but he's a decent person. You will give him that. He's charitable, as Corporal Works of Mercy, for example. He's not the person that people outside the Irish situation. He's not the person they thought he was. And even Nathaniel Gardner, for example, and Adam's wife, they realized that what the Brahmin rulers of the city and state would like to believe about Skeffington is not true. He's a very warm person, friend, and all the rest. And so these are qualities that O'Connor himself displayed. And it comes very, very strong. It's an unusual kind of novel to write. It's no cynical novel by any means, and not a harsh novel at all, I think. Very charitable person.
Hi, I'm Tod Worner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, The Last Hurrah. In Edwin O'Connor's The Last Hurrah, Frank Skeffington mused, quote, "The indirect penetration of the home by the television screen was all very well. To his mind, it did not begin to compare in effectiveness with the direct and personal visit, with the sign of recognition, the extended hand, the solicitous inquiry into family affairs, the donation of favor or promise of favor. It was this procedure, painstakingly accomplished, that had always been the heart of Skeffington's campaign. He would not change now." And Edwin O'Connor would add, Skeffington did not believe in shortcuts to the electorate. So, Charlie, in the race for mayor of, let's say, ostensibly Boston, Frank Skeffington runs against Kevin McCluskey, as we said, a young, handsome war veteran, family man, again, campaigning through TV spots in his living room with that oversized painting of Pius XII and the literally rented Irish setter dog by the fireplace. Is McCluskey's modern campaign lazy and cynical in the eyes of Edwin O'Connor, or smart and efficient?
It's new.
Yeah.
It's television. We see him most clearly when he appears on television. Skeffington is radio. He has a voice, and the contrast, that the radio voice of Skeffington is contrasted with the TV image making of McCluskey. But that's the problem. McCluskey wins because Skeffington loses. His slaves and all the rest are rapidly disappearing, going into that American past, as someone said, from whom no traveler returns. And he doesn't realize that his day and his politics is rapidly going into the past.
Sure.
There's a kind of a tacked on ending at the end of the Last Hurrah about how all of this started with Roosevelt, and it's not terribly convincing in many ways, but O'Connor doesn't like things to be changed too much too rapidly, and so McCluskey is not a bad guy. He's a good guy. He wins just by being who he is, and doesn't have to say much. Quite unlike Skeffington. Skeffington's doing the same thing over and over, and that eventually catches up with him.
I'm glad you raised the notion of Roosevelt, because they are, this is one of Adam's friends. As you're identifying here, those of you who are listening, this is Skeffington has this race that looks like it's locked up and ultimately is defeated, shocking everybody. And one of the political watchers and friends of Adam, the nephew, is explaining that he says the reason why this happened was, and he says one word, it was Roosevelt, and to some extent talks about Roosevelt is effectively, by federalizing supports that people used to rely on locally, it takes the air out of the sails, the wind out of the sails of the machines, so that people, instead of going to Frank Skeffington for a handout or for help or patronage or whatever, they go to the unemployment insurance office, or they had this program or that program. And so the nationalization of charity, if you will, Social Security, kind of took, again, it took away some of the powers of the machines. You said it was not altogether convincing. One could say even that it was also probably a foretaste of the Great Society, is what Lyndon Johnson would be doing, and so on and so forth. Tell me your thoughts. Just expand on that. Is that a plausible explanation for? I know machines still exist, but we don't have Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed in the way we used to.
Right.
Is the theory too convenient, or do you think there's something to it?
Well, there's something to the theory, but again, O'Connor. How should I say it? O'Connor? I should point out, O'Connor's own father was a self-made man. He was a physician, but anyway, and he detested Roosevelt, and in a way, I don't know why, but O'Connor inserts that in at the end. The problem with that series is at the end, it comes out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of anything that the novel has been developing. It suddenly enlarges the whole thing all of a sudden, the whole national scene, and but it doesn't show us exactly how that works.
Right.
But there's something to it, obviously. The more the federal government grows, it diminishes the that or can diminish the power of certain local politicians.
Yeah, it makes me think about Catholic subsidiarity. Kind of
Right.
that when something,
Right.
but of course, the one thing we know is that from a political standpoint, there can be local corruption and local benefit, and there can be national corruption and national
Of course,
benefit. I mean,
yes.
so
Yeah.
it's sort of
Yeah.
with the taint of of the human condition follows us everywhere we go. We encounter in this book Skeffington's physical limits. Is Edwin O'Connor, notwithstanding the changing of the guard in terms of a new campaign and different values and so on, but is Edwin O'Connor making a test? Is he sort of making a point that politics is a young man or a young woman's game, or is your sense that he's trying to say, actually, with all these lessons Skeffington is passing on, notwithstanding its tragic loss in the end, there's virtue to this that shouldn't be so easily jettisoned?
Yeah. Oh, ask me an easy one when it comes to should men or women be in politics?
Yeah.
I don't know. I never thought about this too much. What I do remember was how suddenly things changed from the 40s and 50s and then into the 60s. And remember, Skeffington was old. He was 72. Kennedy was he was very young. I think he was 42.
Yeah.
When he became president. And so that's the thing I always think about, that big contrast in the older generations. And suddenly here was something new. And Dick Nixon was also young when he was running. So there was a whole different generation that came along. War veterans, most of them, and so on. Does politics take its toll on people? I'm sure it does. It's strenuous. It can be very strenuous. Lack of sleep during campaigns, for example, and so on.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go into can women get into politics?
Oh no. That was that wasn't my question. It was more as politics a young man, a young person's game versus an old person game. Not so much a division between men and women. I completely agree. Equally appropriate. Everybody out there, don't mail your letters.
Yeah, it is true though that politicians, when you think of it, they don't really stay in office too late into life, do they? Most of them, I think, because it does take its toll. I'm sure it takes its toll on family life, for example, and the irregular hours and all kinds of temptations are thrown your way. Just think of the Epstein thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Charlie, the story concludes with a shockingly defeated Skeffington, a massive heart attack, and final bedridden moments cheered by conversations with old friends and heartened by last rites. But there's a particular poignancy when Skeffington, the forever politician, leads his circle of advisors, friends, and confidants in sort of the illusion that he will win when he recovers and run for governor. And this was just such a moment of grace when all but maybe Ditto, then the lightheaded kind of hanger-on aide of Skeffington, they all know that there will be no other campaign, and yet this is where Skeffington and his friends lived, and he gave them there was one last hurrah right there. We're going to let's plot for just a minute more. Could you say a few words about this grace that this dying man extends to his coterie of friends?
Yeah, well, the title, The Last Hurrah, apparently was made up by O'Connor. He didn't get it from somewhere else. It sounds like it, he did, but he made it up. Nobody's ever found a source for it.
Wow.
And hurrah, of course, is like hallelujah. It's a exclamation of praise or wonder, joy, elation. And that is a very good portrayal of all of that suddenly ending, and a very sober note taking over the novel. Politics is comedy, great comedy, as at its height, he said it was great comedy, not tragedy.
Yeah.
And that's Edmund O'Connor all over. He didn't want to look too deeply into the deadly sins, and so you don't really find them very much in the Last Hurrah.
Yeah. The Last Hurrah was published in 1956, 70 years ago this year.
That's right. Yeah.
Are there any Frank Skeffingtons around still, or has his style of politics gone extinct?
I don't know any. I know people often of Irish descent who love to talk and speak nostalgically of the past a lot. So, but they don't seem to have a place in politics anymore.
Yeah.
Remember how Kennedy's speech was very clipped and crisp and hard hitting, with some humor, to be sure. There was still some of that there, but it was a very different style of politics. I think O'Connor could have done a better job of seeing the not so nice side of some of this stuff, like Footsie McEntee and his 17 votes in one day. In a later novel called All in the Family, which is not the same as the TV show by any means.
Yeah.
He does get a little tougher on politics. He talks about, he portrays a political family. Many people think that it's based on the Kennedys, but no, it's not. It's a very different family. And in that novel, he does get a little tougher on political corruption. I think he realized that he treated it too lightly in the Last Hurrah. But anyway, I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Yeah. And two last questions for you, Charlie. Certain aspects of the Last Hurrah kind of remind a person of Robert Penn Warren's All the King's Men.
Oh yeah.
Clearly not as dark as that one, but there are many judgments expressed by Skeffington's opponents and enemies as the book concludes. So Charlie, is Frank Skeffington a good man or a bad man? And what does the Last Hurrah teach us about human nature and politics?
Well, he's a good man. I think that's definitely O'Connor's take on him. He's a good man. People, his opponents, especially the older Boston crusty types, do their best to just do dirt on him, as it says. They don't really know him very much. They see him as one of these Irish intruders. But yes, he's a good man. He doesn't really want to believe, like O'Connor, the worst of people. He even knows how to warm up to those crusty types in Boston in order to bend them a little bit. Sometimes he uses that tactic and so on. He's like all of us. He's fallen. He has faults. But I think basically he's a good man. It's an unusual novel in that, as Adams finds out, he's a remarkably good man. And he's not the kind of person people usually write about when they write a political novel.
Finally, Charlie, how did you become so interested in Edwin O'Connor and his works? And to finish after that, what should we read next?
Okay. Well, I got interested in the novel in Edwin O'Connor in 1956. I vividly remember the day I went to a Jesuit high school, and I vividly remember the day when one of my teachers came into class and talked about this new novel that had just come out about our city, Boston. And he read to us one positive review of the novel and one negative review of the novel. That's an old Jesuit tradition to stimulate thinking. You look at one angle and another angle very opposed. Anyway, so that was my introduction to Edwin O'Connor. And then, of course, he became an overnight bestseller. He had been living a threadbare existence up to now, and he was suddenly a millionaire in just a few months, which was a lot of money in those days. Then I noticed many years later, it must have been in the mid-90s, I was teaching my Irish literature class, and I wanted to do an Irish-American author. And I said, gee, I think I'll do Frank. I think I'll do The Last Hurrah about Frank Skeffington. And I noticed nobody had ever written Frank Edmund O'Connor's biography. And I said, wait a minute, this is crazy. This is a famous book when it came out, and so was The Edge of Sadness. It had been forgotten. And so I said, I think I'm going to look into this. I found out that his sister was still living right here in Rhode Island. And I quickly contacted her. And all of a sudden, one thing led to another. It's the whole thing fell into my lap.
Wow.
That's the only way to put it. And I was well situated. I could go every day to the Boston Public Library where his papers are and go through all those papers. It took me 2 summers to do that. And it didn't take me long to find a publisher. And I tried Notre Dame first, but no, they wouldn't publish it. So Catholic University of America Press published it in 2003. I think the next book to read, if you like The Edge of Sadness, The Last Hurrah, the next book to read is The Edge of Sadness, which came out about 6 years later.
Okay.
A very different kind of a book about an alcoholic priest and the people he knows and the families that he engages with. For Edmund O'Connor, politics can be great comedy. It's great storytelling. He revels in it. And he always tells us that the past is real and the past is valuable. And I think those are important takeaways.
Charlie Duffy, professor, scholar, and enthusiast for the late, great Edwin O'Connor. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Todd.
So I've been thinking, when I was a young internal medicine resident, an older physician mentor placed in my hands Edwin O'Connor's novel, The Last Hurrah. Have you ever read this, Todd? I hadn't. His eyes twinkled and his grin widened. I think you'll like it. Well, I'm sorry to say that 25 years ago, I started the book, but I never finished it. Shame-faced, I put it back in his hands 6 months after he had given it to me, but I promised I would read it someday. Well, I finally did, and I loved it. What was it that my friend and mentor wanted me to find in The Last Hurrah? A good yarn, a political testament, a glimpse into the mysteries of human nature? It was all there. Pilloried by the political rival Mother Garvis and the enemy publisher Amos Force, loved by the strategist John Gorman and the sycophant Ditto Poland, and humanized by his nephew Andrew Caulfield and Andrew's wife Maeve, two-time governor and now Boston mayoral candidate Frank Skeffington was at the center of it all, just the way he liked it. Now, to be sure, Frank Skeffington was a machine politician, an operator, and even a manipulator, but he was no cynic. We've all become accustomed to the well-worn trope of the political cynic. Candidates like Huey Long or operators like Boss Tweed, who amass great power beneath the veneer of public spiritedness. But Frank Skeffington was different. Yes, there was corruption in the form of political patronage, dirty tricks, and even voter fraud, as evidenced by a minion named Footsie, named for having, fleet of foot, voted 17 times for Frank Skeffington in one election of old. But Skeffington loved his constituents, adored his Irish culture, and gloried in the game of politics. Instead of inviting his nephew to a rally, he brought him to a wake. Instead of making a show of his generosity, he quietly pressed money into a poor widow's hand. Instead of lambasting his aides for losing, he thanked them for their loyalty. Skeffington loved the game, but he loved the people even more. Without doubt, The Last Hurrah is a story of brokenness, but is also a story of earnest grace that outlives it. Years ago, a physician mentor pressed The Last Hurrah into my hands. I'm so glad he did. And one last thing. Read The Last Hurrah to dive into the inner workings of a fictional telling of Irish machine politics in Boston or a Boston-like New England locale, but also watch the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington starring Jimmy Stewart. Discover that politics is a messy business, awash with the dark side of the human condition, but it is also ennobled by the moments of political courage and integrity that not only surprise us, but give us a little boost of hope. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Tod Worner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.